Colin Draper said, "Your attitude doesn't fit our culture." Through my laptop speakers, he was flat and emotionless. "We're going to have to let you go effective immediately." I stared at the screen in shock, my mind racing to process what had just happened the day before, when I had presented a thorough plan to improve our human resources. "We'll send you the required paperwork. Please return any company property by the end of the week before I leave." Project management system, a plan that would have increased efficiency and transparency across the company. "Colin, I don't understand. My proposal was about improving workflow, and the decision is final." Could reply, but he clicked end meeting, and my screen went black. I sat there in my Fort Lauderdale home office, stunned. I had worked for Vertex Solutions for 7 years, staying up late to make sure projects were completed on time, and this is how it ended: a 3-minute Zoom call and a digital door slamming in my face. "My name is Tanya Whitmore, and I am 40 years old. I had established myself as a successful operations analyst who saved failing projects, repaired client relationships harmed by the mistakes of upper management, and continuously raised our efficiency metrics year after year. The clients adored me because I was honest and produced results, which Colin didn't mention." At the top, I looked at my notebook, where I had written down the main points of my proposal, which I had carefully avoided saying because it would have exposed exactly how he and other executives were misallocating resources. The new tracking tools would have shown with uncomfortable clarity how budgets were being inflated and timelines were being manipulated to cover for poor planning. Next to it was my phone, which had already started to ring with messages from worried coworkers who had heard the news. Instead of picking it up, I opened my laptop and typed the Whitmore Consulting Group business plan at the top. A strange serenity descended upon me. I had expected to feel angry or hopeless, but instead I felt as the truth of my circumstances set in. I realized that this wasn't the end but rather a chance to improve. I had spent years developing relationships with our clients, learning about their needs, and providing solutions that truly worked. That knowledge didn't belong to Vertex Solutions, it belonged to me. I had always been the problem solver and fixer, and when I joined Vertex Solutions 7 years ago, they were a struggling project management firm that was barely surviving. Finally, I built something that reflected my values of transparency, efficiency, and genuine client service. The phone kept buzzing, but I ignored it for the time being because I had plans to do. In my first year, I completely restructured their workflow systems, implemented regular client check-ins, and developed custom solutions for their 3 biggest accounts, including Colin, who had recently been promoted to chief. They were struggling to stay afloat in a competitive market because their processes were out of date, their client communication was inconsistent, and their reputation was suffering. He would say, "You're invaluable, Tanya," after I saved yet another project that had been badly handled from the beginning. "The clients trust you," he said, as Colin and the other executives sulked and ate. At the time, the operations officer took credit for the majority of my innovations during executive meetings, but I didn't mind because I believed in the work, not the recognition. James Henderson from Texac Corporation once said to me, "I don't care who's officially in charge, we know you're the boss." I was the one who developed relationships with potential clients by truly fulfilling those promises. I spent hours learning about each client's particular challenges and frequently developing customized solutions that went beyond our standard offerings. Robert Johnson at Borealis Capital and Diane Powell at North Peak Engineering both expressed similar views, saying that they knew who to turn to when they wanted honest answers and practical solutions. My husband, Tyler, had been warning me for years that I was underappreciated at Vertex. Would say, "You're carrying that company on your shoulders, while I worked late into the night to fix issues I hadn't caused. One day you should strike out on your own." I consistently rejected the notion that I had a stable position, a good wage, and that I was making a difference, even if it wasn't always. In addition to the fact that starting over seemed intimidating and dangerous, Tyler was blind to the fact that the company culture had been gradually declining. The emphasis had shifted from client satisfaction to executive bonuses. Projects were being understaffed, And budgets had inexplicably increased the resources allotted based on which managers were in favor that week rather than which projects truly required them. My suggested system would have made all of this clear. It would have generated automated reports that track time, budget, and resource allocation for every project, and the dashboard would have made it impossible to conceal the inefficiencies I had been covertly making up for over the years. In hindsight, I should have anticipated Colin's response because my suggestion wasn't merely a change, rather, it was a challenge to the status quo that favored him and his inner circle. The morning after my dismissal, I woke up feeling oddly light, and Tyler brought me coffee in bed. His expression was a mix of worry and rage on my part. Sitting on the edge of the bed, he said, "I still can't believe they fired you through a video call. After everything you've done for them." I took a sip of coffee and reached for my laptop. The funny thing is that I'm not even angry anymore. Instead, I'm relieved that I've been making up for their years of poor management, covering up their errors and playing around their egos. I'm tired, Tyler. He looked at my face. What are you going to do? I turned my laptop to him and showed him the business plan I had spent the last half of the night creating. I'm going to start my own consulting firm, just like I always do, but on my terms. Tyler scanned the document, his face changing from surprise to excitement. You're serious about this? I confirmed that I've already secured the domain name and started outlining service packages. I spent the rest of the morning calling and sending emails to inform my contacts about my career. Not to disparage Vertex or Colin, I was too professional for that transition. I was cautious about how I phrased it, just saying that I was starting a new business centered on operational efficiency and project management consulting. By lunchtime, my inbox was overflowing with emails from former coworkers who were shocked that I was leaving, industry contacts who offered connections, and, most unexpectedly, one from James. When Henderson at Trixa Corporation learned of your departure from Vertex, I called him right away and said, "What the hell happened?" I gave him the sanitized version of the company's future vision, but James wasn't buying it, and Colin eventually realized you were the one holding everything together. We have 3 big projects with Vertex planned for the upcoming quarter, but honestly, you were the only reason we stayed with them. If you're going independent, we'd prefer to work directly with you. James continued to listen, and I felt a twinge of excitement mixed with fear. James, that's a big offer. It's obvious to us. Your strategic approach has saved us a lot of time and money. Send me a proposal by the end of the week. After we hung up, I sat in stunned silence. By the end of the day, my phone rang again, and it was Diane Powell from North Peak Engineering. She had essentially the same message. 3 of Vertex's largest clients, who accounted for almost 40% of Borealis Capital's quarterly revenue, had also been contacted and were prepared to follow me out the door that evening. As I revised my business plan in light of this surprising development, I came to the realization that what Colin had meant as punishment had actually become my freedom. I had transformed our guest bedroom into a formal office with a professional video call set up a week after I was fired, and Tyler had surprised me with a personalized nameplate for my desk that read Tanya Whitmore, founder and CEO. I was also finishing up my proposal for Trixa Corporation when my phone. "I'm doing well, Jessica. What can I do for you?" "Well, Colin asked me to reach out. There seems to be some trouble," she said when I answered the phone. The caller ID showed it was Jessica Barnes-Vert, X's HR Director Tanya. I leaned back in my chair. "And you're calling me because they specifically mentioned your name, Colin? And I thought maybe you might have influenced their decision to end their contracts because they're confused with some of our clients." There was a pause on the line. "So would you consider returning? Colin is ready to offer you a deal. I've started my own consulting firm, which I'm legally allowed to do, and I haven't broken any non-compete agreements because Vertex doesn't have any. If clients are making business decisions, that's their prerogative." The offer, which included a sizable raise and a new title, caught me off guard, but it didn't take long to figure out my response. "Thank you, Jessica, but I've already committed to a different route." After hanging up, I got an email from Trixa stating that they had formally ended their relationship with Whitmore Solutions and were anticipating a signed copy of the proposal I submitted to Whitmore Consulting Group. Was attached, and it was accepted without any changes within hours. Similar emails from North Peak Engineering at Borealis Capital also arrived, and suddenly I had 3 important clients on my plate for the upcoming quarter. The next day, I got a message from David Chen, one of Vertex's senior. David sounded like he was speaking in hushed tones when he called, saying, after those 3 clients pulled out, Colin called an emergency meeting, and he's blaming everyone but himself. I'm sorry to hear that, I said. Project managers and someone I'd worked closely with for years need to talk. Can I call you? I sincerely care about my former coworkers. Don't feel sorry, you can see the expressions on the executives' faces when they finally realized who was truly keeping the clients happy. David stopped to listen, and some of us are considering leaving. Would you be interested in hiring some more seasoned team members? I hadn't intended on growing so rapidly, but I informed him that by the end of the second week, Whitmore Consulting Group had expanded to include David and 2 other former Verts, and that having a trusted team would enable me to take on additional clients sooner. Former workers Patrick Wilson, a talented customer relations manager, and Anna Martinez, a superb data analyst, we set opening up shop in a modest but polished office building I rented in downtown Fort Lauderdale. It was expensive, but I understood how important it was to project a trustworthy company image to potential customers. What I didn't anticipate, though, was how quickly word would get out in our sector, as my phone was ringing nonstop with calls from prospective customers who had heard about the new company. By that Vertex miracle worker, I learned through contacts in the industry that Colin was frantically trying to stop more clients from leaving, and he had finally started putting some of the changes I had suggested into practice. However, it was too late. 3 months into operating Whitmore Consulting Group, we had already outgrown our tiny office space. With a team that now included 7 former Vertex employees and a client list that was growing every week, I was thinking about our long-term growth strategy and looking at larger offices when David entered my office one evening as I was finishing up for the day. He had a strange look on his face and said, "You're going to want to see this," setting his tablet on my desk. According to an industry newsletter titled, Vertex Solutions Announces Restructuring Amid Client Exodus, the company had lost more than half of its clientele in a 12-week period and was now laying off almost a third of its employees, with Collins being demoted. David added that the board had finally intervened. I read the article with a range of mixed feelings. I hadn't intended to harm Vertex, I had only improved it. David added, "Take back the tablet and go to another page. Look who's reaching out." It was a LinkedIn message from Edward Novak. Tanya, the former CEO, "I believe we should speak since the board has some inquiries regarding the systems you created while working at Vertex, and to be honest, we could use your insights. Would you be willing to consult?" I looked up at David, who was smiling, "And they want to hire you to clean up the mess they made when they fired you." The irony wasn't lost on me. I told David that night when I spoke with Tyler over dinner about the situation. "You don't owe them anything," he reminded me, "but helping them could be profitable and would demonstrate to everyone that you're the bigger person." I nodded, taking into account the various viewpoints. It would also allow me to put the transparency measures I've always desired in place. The following day, I replied to Edward's message, agreeing to meet but making it clear that I would be attending as a consultant rather than as a prospective employee. The meeting was scheduled for the following week at Vertex's headquarters, and when I got there, the environment was very different. There were fewer employees rushing around, and the reception area was quieter. Edward, who looked worn and humbled, greeted me and led me to the conference room, saying, "Thank you for coming, Tanya. I appreciate your willingness to speak." Before we started, Edward stated, once we were all seated, "I want to apologize for how your departure was handled. It was unprofessional, and as we've now discovered, not just Edward but also 3 board members, including Colin, were noticeably absent from the conference room. We've reviewed your proposal for system improvements from before your termination, and it's exactly what this company needs and, to be honest, should have implemented years ago. We'd like to hire Whitmore Consulting Group to implement those systems. Edward. I realized that one of the board members was incredibly short-sighted. An older woman I recognized as Victoria Winters spoke up. Informed me that we were ready to offer a very competitive contract. I listened intently, asking specific questions about their timeline and expectations because it was a big project that would require a lot of resources from my expanding business. As our meeting came to an end, Victoria escorted me to the elevator and said in a quiet voice that Colin's decision to let you go might have been. I smiled politely as the elevator doors closed, feeling vindicated, not because Vertex was having trouble, but because sometimes it takes a disruption to see what's truly valuable. This was the most costly mistake in this company's history, and some of us on the board are still trying to figure out how it happened. The contract with Vertex turned out to be just the beginning because my value had finally been acknowledged by the industry as a whole, not just by them. When word got out that Whitmore Consulting Group was now collaborating with the company that had fired its founder, our reputation in the sector skyrocketed, and companies were interested in a consultancy that could provide such 6 months after starting my business. We had relocated to a large office in a prestigious building in downtown Fort Lauderdale, and our team had grown to 15 people, the majority of whom were specialists I had handpicked for their extraordinary skills and client-focused mindset. On the day we signed our 10th major client, I organized during a small celebration in the office. While we were toasting our accomplishments with champagne, my assistant told me that someone was asking to see me in reception. To my surprise, it was Colin Draper. "Do you have a minute?" he asked, appearing uneasy in our modern reception area. Curious about his unexpected visit, I led him to my office. "Congratulations on your success," he said, clumsily pointing to the office surrounding us. "You've built something impressive here, thank you." I said, "What can I do for you, Colin?" and he shuffled in his seat, saying, "I'm not here on behalf of Vert." I waited for him to respond after my ex was fired. "Last month." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, even though we both knew I wasn't. "Look, Tanya," he said, leaning over me. "Continue the transparency systems you implemented revealed some discrepancies in my management decisions." He cleared his throat, and the board wasn't pleased. I couldn't help but appreciate the irony that the very system he had fired me for proposing had ultimately exposed his mismanagement. He took a big breath and said, "I'm here to ask if you might have a position available." The request was so unexpected. "I know I made a mistake with you. I was protecting myself instead of doing what was right for the company, but I'm good at what I do when I have the right guidance." That I was momentarily unable to reply to Colin Draper, the man who had abruptly fired me via Zoom, asking me for a job. I carefully examined him to see if this was a sign of humility or if it was just another self-serving tactic. Ultimately, I told him that my business is founded on openness, cooperation, and sincere customer service. "Those aren't just that's precisely why I want to work with you," he nodded quickly. "I've learned from my mistakes." I thought about his request, and I decided that hiring Colin would be viewed as either a great act of forgiveness or a stupid choice to bring in someone who had already proven his character. "I don't have a position for you," I said. "I was fired because I threatened a system that was benefiting you at the expense of clients and colleagues, not because my attitude didn't fit the culture." Finally, I'm watching his face fall, "but I do have some contacts in the industry who might make some calls on one condition." Colin had the grace to look later that afternoon. I made those calls as promised, not because Colin deserved my assistance, but because I realized that my company's success was not only measured in clients and revenue but also in this moment of having the confidence and security to face a former adversary without bitterness. "I'm ashamed you're right, and I've paid for that mistake." As I walked him out, I stood at the podium as the keynote speaker at the annual Project Management Excellence Conference in Miami 1 year after being fired over Zoom because it was the type of leader I had chosen to be, one that values growth and second chances, even for those who hadn't offered me the same. The irony that Colin had represented Vert the year before didn't escape my notice. At this event, I reminded a room full of industry experts that success isn't only about having the correct plans, it's also about putting them into practice with honesty and openness. As I talked, I could see Vert executives sitting in the front as ex-solutions. When I started Whitmore Consulting Group, I added, it wasn't about competing with former employers or proving anyone wrong. It was about creating a space where good work could be done honestly. Edward Novak nodded in agreement with my points, and Victoria Winters actually took notes. Their company had stabilized under new leadership, but they hadn't regained their former market position, where employees' contributions were acknowledged and clients received the value they paid for. Following my speech at the networking reception, Edward came up to me and offered me a glass of sparkling water. He said, "That was a great presentation, Tanya, but I couldn't help but feel that it was partially aimed at us." I smiled and said, "Take it, but you need to, Edward." I looked around at the crowd, many of whom were gathered around my colleagues from Whitmore Consulting. Your company has captured the industry's attention, and everyone wants to know your secret. I said there isn't one, just hard work, sincere relationships, and open procedures, all of which I tried to put in place at Vertex Edwards. His expression changed to one of reflection as the board discussed a possible acquisition offer. Vertex is still having trouble regaining its clientele, and your systems have only brought to light the structural problems that we have been ignoring for years. I was taken aback by his candor. Are you recommending Whitmore Consulting? Whitmore Consulting Group's acquisition of Vertex Solutions made headlines in all industry publications. What started out as my personal revenge story evolved into a business success story that would be taught in management schools. The group's consideration of purchasing Vertex Solutions would be an unconventional move, but it might be advantageous for both businesses. We kept the majority of Vertex's remaining staff members at our schools and integrated them into our more open culture. Some of them adjusted to the change easily, while others found it difficult to meet the accountability requirements of our systems. Colin, who had secured a job with a smaller company as a result of my recommendation, sent me a congrats message. Email with the simple message, "I'm learning from your example. You created something amazing out of adversity." I never imagined we'd end up here, David said, raising his glass, from that tiny office to owning the company. I invited the original team members who had joined me in those early days to a private dinner on the day we closed the acquisition. Anna giggled, "I remember when we were working crazy hours and scraping together equipment, and now look at us. That company let us go." I glanced around the table at those who had risked their lives for my vision when it was merely a stubborn reaction to being rejected. Without your belief in me, I couldn't have accomplished any of this. The best part is that we didn't have to compromise who we are to get here. We won by being better, not by being ruthless. As we celebrated, I thought back on the journey when Colin ended that Zoom call, cutting me off without the opportunity to discuss what we could build together. Patrick, who had recently been promoted to head our client relations department, spoke up. He believed he was showcasing his power by having a dignified conversation, but instead he unintentionally helped me start something much bigger than I otherwise would have. Sometimes the best opportunities are disguised as unfair dismissals, and Whitmore Consulting Group grew, eventually opening offices in 3 more cities. I frequently thought about how getting fired in the 3-minute Zoom conversation had become the best career growth of my life, transforming hardship into success. My leadership style, which was centered on empowering staff members and upholding authentic client relationships, became a case study in good management. Professionalism as opposed to small-time retaliation.